Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Hakumei in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 28, Part 2, Illusions. Uchiha Madara was a man who was usually behind the situations in the world. He had caused most of the turmoil in Kiri. He had been behind the formation of Akatsuki. He had been behind the Kyuubi's attack on Konoha. Now, he watched another part of his grand design. He had also been behind the current war that was now raging, and everything was going according to his plan, and his alone. Madara sat on the head of his own statue, looking at the smoke as it rose from Konoha and smiled behind his mask. He had done well by making sure that those children remained unseen. They were acting as his perfect agent in this. Not that they knew it, and they would survive this battle. The only thing that annoyed him was his loss of the pawn of Orochimaru. Jiraiya or Tsunade would have killed him by now. A tragic loss, but one that he could compensate for. The loss of Itachi, on the other hand, well, he had guessed a long time ago that he wasn't anywhere near as loyal as he acted, but he did contribute to the whole plan. Even his defection did, but it was a little depressing to see a relative with so much potential disappear from his control. He would have put Itachi in a place of power too. Then again, they did have so much in common, so it was Madara did understand, and, from his point of view, there were no hard feelings in this. It was just the way it was. Madara stood up. He had other aspects of his plan to prepare for. He also had to go get his little underling. After all, that man had a tendency to do very unpleasant things if he was allowed on his own, and his role was over for now. He had best remain safe and sound in the shadows of minor villainy. Konoha wasn't the main focus anymore. It was just another little village that was to be used and disposed of when he was done. Danzu had actually been starting to show signs of being a possible problem. That man had always been a little difficult to predict. Madara hadn't even been sure that he was going to murder the Sandaime the way that he was supposed to. Well, things were going as planned, and Konoha was going to be relegated back to its puppet status that it had gained for him. Madara smirked as his eyes traveled to the statue that was opposite of his. It was wonderful to be able to think that way. "You're stripping." Teiwa's voice was flat as Kimimaro shed his haori and loosened his shirt so that it fell, revealing his bare chest. It was a pain to fight with his shirt on. After all, being a fighter who pulled his own bones out made it difficult and slow. He had the chance to pull out his spine earlier, but being that he was taking on 4 at the same time, Kimimaro was going to have to prove just how powerful he really was. He had been drinking milk all day for this. Chances were he wasn't going to be getting too tired to fight before he had the chance to crush these guys. He reached behind him and began to pull on the bone that was protruding, watching as the 4 stopped moving for a second as they stared in horror as Kimimaro slowly pulled out his own spinal cord. He was kind of enjoying this. For a brief moment he wished he could pull his skull out along with it the way he had once when training. Even Tsunade had turned pale when she saw that. But 2 whips were enough to make the spider guy turn white. Did he just pull out his spine? One of the 2 heads of the pale boy asked. I mean, when I saw him holding a bone whip I didn't think. These guys were some to talk. That guy had 2 heads. I've had enough of waiting. One of them, a large boy who was obviously short-range, yelled, I'm going to kill him myself. He ran forwards, looking like he was going to crush Kimimaro with his bare arms, but then he started to make symbols. Doton Kekai, Dorodomu. He yelled. Kimimaro jumped straight up into the air, using both whips to crack the earth as it moved towards him. Landing on the side of a building, he dashed forwards. He was out of the range of the attack, but that didn't mean that he didn't have to worry about another one. The girl's ogres looked dangerous, but she hadn't attacked yet. She seemed more interested in seeing him move and waiting for an opportunity. Very well. Kimimaro hated to make someone wait after all. Using his other whip to block a sudden attack from the fat boy, wasn't it Jirobo, that had jumped up to meet him and was surprisingly fast, he made a nice noticeable opening for someone to take. It wasn't the girl who took it. It was the guy with the extra arms. Kyumon and Keen. Kimimaro jumped to avoid the golden thing, but somehow ended up in the crushing grip of Jirobo. Kimimaro didn't wait for him to activate the attack. He knew what he was doing, and at that time he honestly didn't care. He wasn't going to allow himself to be beaten. Besides, he wasn't as squeamish about killing people as the others were. Maybe it was because he was older. Maybe it was just because he would honestly do anything if it helped them. It was less of an attack than it was the jetting out of spikes from all around his body. Jirobo stiffened and went limp, falling off of him. Kimimaro landed on his feet and dashed towards the spider boy, jumping once to avoid the golden arrows that were aimed at him. 1 down 3 to go. Shino! Naruto almost yelled. Shino nodded. It's nice to see you again, Naruto-kun, but I would rather talk after we have incapacitated Sora. Naruto nodded. He didn't have time to worry too much about Shino's loyalties. He was helping him at the moment, which was enough for him. Right. Your family's special technique is allowing those bugs to eat chakra, right? Among other things. Naruto grinned. Good. How much can they eat? Shino seemed to understand where this was going. Not enough of the Kyuubi's chakra to immobilize him. How about enough to keep him from going past this stage? The thing that had been Sora thrashed against the insects that were surrounding him and the tail that had been starting to grow seemed to have stopped. It had 4 fully formed tails that were swaying in a dizzying pattern around his head. He had fallen completely to a crouch and he almost looked like a fox, complete with long ears and a wide mouth. The only problem was the fact that its face was flat like a person's and there was something horribly like awareness in its glowing white eyes. Naruto felt his stomach clench but ignored it. He had spent too much of his life in a slight fear that this thing since he was 7. Yeah, he called it fuzzy wuzzy, made fun of it, and was always insulting it, but he was scared of it. Naruto wasn't going to run from it anymore, and he would face and defeat this form of it. After all, if he couldn't work with some cheap copy, how could he call himself the leader of Hakumei? The organization meant to spell the end of Danzu's reign. I think I can manage that for a short time, Shino nodded. Alright, I'll try to get this done quick then, Naruto said, dashing forwards. Sora wasn't distracted by Shino's bugs enough not to see him, and he attacked, all 4 tails lashing out and a clawed hard reaching for him. The attack hit Naruto directly, but instead of falling to the ground, he exploded with a blast that forced even Sora back a little bit. From above, 2 Narutos fell. One of them holding what looked like a sphere of energy in his hand. Raise non! Naruto yelled as he plunged down to meet it. The Sorakuabai looked up in time to see Naruto crash down on him, and managed to get the thing in the face. Naruto jumped off, landing on his feet a little ways back with his arms slightly raised, ready to fight. Sora shook his head rapidly as though to clear it and growled a little bit. Ah, come on, Naruto grumbled, I hit you in the face. At least look a little more unhappy about it than that. Sora just roared at him, and jumped to attack. Naruto didn't quite get away in time, and he landed next to Shino clutching one arm. Naruto decided that he now had a new reason to hate Kyuubi. He broke all the natural laws of how things were supposed to get wounded. A hit to the face should have won. He gritted his teeth and nodded to Shino. If Raise Non alone wasn't enough, he'd have to find a better way to do it, but Sora wasn't going to wait. The tails suddenly stretched out, and managed to hit both of them. Shino dissolved into insects and Naruto suddenly melted into a clay-like substance which made the tail stick into it. Naruto appeared in another tree, laughing madly. That's mine Bunshin. He grinned, it'll basically absorb your attack along with whatever you were using to attack with. Not that you actually understand me. You seem to like Bunshin-based attacks, Naruto-kun, Shino said, appearing next to him. Naruto shrugged, I'm good at them. It's funny, since as long as you have some of the element around, you don't actually have to have any kind of affiliation with the element. I see. Naruto dodged another attack from the Sorakuabai. Naruto-kun, Sora is beginning to stabilize, Shino told him. Don't buy it, Naruto muttered, he's not the real Kyuubi container, and the Kyuubi's trying to get you to take your bugs back. Shino looked at Naruto sharply at the statement that Sora wasn't the true Kyuubi container, and Naruto mentally cursed. He shouldn't have known that. How dash Shino began, but Naruto cut him off. I have an idea, he said, grinning. Itachi was a little taller than he had been the last that Sasuke had seen him, and he looked a little more tired. What really surprised Sasuke though, was the uniform that he was wearing. Black with red clouds that sailed along, like the newly risen sun had just hit them. It was the uniform of Akatsuki. Sasuke didn't know that much about the organization, mostly because Jiraiya's sources got a little vague on that point. He knew that they were an organization that was composed of missing nin from pretty much every major village and a few minor ones. Their motives were unclear, and even Jiraiya had never managed to get a successful mole in there. There was one more thing that Sasuke knew about Akatsuki for certain. They were after the Jinhiriki. Sasuke wasn't sure just what to think. On the one hand, Sasuke had wanted to see his brother, but, was he after Naruto and Gaara? Some of his uncertainty must have shown on his face because Itachi spoke again. Sasuke, I'll explain everything to you later. You cannot win against Yumi yet. Go and help your friends. The words were soft, but the command was very much present. Yumi seemed to regain her movement faster than Sasuke and the whip began to move again. This time towards Itachi. Sasuke had a brief feeling that he could have crept up behind her and attacked, and she wouldn't have noticed, but something about the way Itachi had told him to go made him jump towards the ring around the arena, avoiding the sun in battle overhead, which seemed to have reached a standstill. It was denying all of Sasuke's urges to go back and pound Yumi to the point of insensibility for daring to hurt Sakura, but there was a more important decision for him to make. He had to warn Hakumei. Akatsuki worked in pairs. If Itachi was a member, then there was another member around here somewhere, and Sasuke didn't know where or who they were. He had to warn the others. If Akatsuki was here, it just changed this entire game. As messed up as everything had been, there was still a chance of their winning. Danzu hadn't really been prepared other than paranoia security. It had been enough to spare Danzu's hide, but Konoha wasn't organized for an attack, and with the double attack from Suna and Oto, it was even worse. The only problem was that no one knew who to fight. Oto, Suna, and the rebels wanted Konoha, but none of them wanted it for the same reason. Therefore they fought each other, helped each other, and were generally in each other's way. Akatsuki wasn't interested in this kind of thing. They only appeared when there was a Jinhiriki close by. Sasuke jumped into some of the trees that were surrounding the arena and looked around. He could see what looked like an attack going on from the right, and with the sheer amount of yelling, it sounded like Naruto. Well, leader was as good as anyone to start with. Sasuke headed in that direction, keeping his head down and moving fast. He stopped on a tree above the scene and didn't hesitate when he threw the two exploding tags at the giant fox thing. Naruto and Shino jumped back and Naruto landed next to him. Hey, Arashi, when did you get here? Just now. What's with the Kyuubi thing? Sasuke jerked his thumb at the screaming fox. That's Sora, Naruto nodded. We now know who tore those people to shreds in the exams. So Danzu decided to play med scientist. How interesting. Sasuke supposed that if he couldn't have the real Kyuubi vessel a substitute should work, and there had been a lot of chakra floating around after the attack, at least that's what Itachi had said. Itachi. Shippuya, there are at least 2 members of Akatsuki here, Sasuke said, mentally cursing Sora the distraction. Akatsuki. Naruto did start cursing. What's Akatsuki doing here? I don't know, but all we need is a joint Kumo Iwa invasion, and we'll probably much have everyone represented, Sasuke growled. This changes everything. Naruto sighed and both of them jumped to another branch to avoid one of Sora's tails as the fox jumped, trying to reach them. Shino, can you still use your bugs to limit the Kyuubi's chakra? I think so, Shino called over, but you and Sasuke-san are going to need to be quick. This isn't good for them. Sasuke looked over at Naruto quickly. He knows who we are, Naruto said with a shrug. I noticed. Sasuke said, glaring at Naruto, I'm more interested in why he knows who we are. I'll ask him when Sora's not trying to kill us. Fair enough, Sasuke nodded, then let's get this over with and find the others. One of Sora's tails came out of nowhere, and Sasuke and Naruto both jumped for cover. Shino wasn't so lucky. With a gasp he staggered back, holding one arm as the bugs around the Kyuubi suddenly jumped out and surrounded their host. Sora jumped to attack, but was stopped by the barrage of small fireballs that made him jump around a little bit to dodge them. That gives Sasuke just the time that he had needed to jump down, grab Shino and pull him to safety. Change of plans, Naruto said, looking at the wound. The Kyuubi's chakra always made things at least 10 times worse. Even a glancing blow could turn into a real problem. Thanks what was basically a poison. Get Shino out of here. We have that safe point. Then try to find Sakura. But dash. But nothing. I can handle Fuzzbud on my own. Get going. Sasuke gave Naruto a dark look, but nodded all the same. In a moment, he was gone, and Naruto was facing Kyuubi alone again. The last thing that Sasuke heard from Naruto were the words. Alright, it's you and me, just like at first. It wasn't a big enough room to really let loose. Zabuza would have killed for a bigger one, but this was better than nothing. To fight Kisame again, now that was some kind of gift. He grinned as he dashed forwards again, swinging the sword, which slid against the wall with a very satisfying sound. Kisame did the same, grinning like a madman. Both swordsmen clashed and jumped back. This is like old times, huh, Zabuza? Kisame grinned. Only this time, I'm seriously going to kill you, Zabuza laughed. You two are actually starting to scare me, muttered the blonde, Yujito, starting to play with the bars that it looked like Kisame's sword had shaved through. Zabuza wasn't really paying any attention to her though. It was time to kill the one who had broken up everything. Miyako was going to have her revenge. Suten, Bakuzu Ishiha, Kisame said calmly, forming the symbols. Zabuza barely had enough time to prepare for the wave that crashed down on him, and Yujito seemed to be bracing herself. The gush of water that Kisame spat out of his mouth almost was enough to make Zabuza get crushed against the wall. There were no windows in the hallway, but Zabuza managed to ride the current with his sword so that he forced open another door, and into an office, then he jumped on the wall, and to the roof. Water fell from the open window of the office like a small river was in there, and Kisame smiled as he looked up at him. Good jump, he said. Kirigaku or no jutsu, Zabuza hissed as a thick fog appeared. Kisame laughed, oh, come on, Zabuza. I know that technique just as well as you do, and I'm just as good as using it and fighting in it as you are. Zabuza smirked, and moved towards his voice. He could hear Kisame's voice, his breath, his heartbeat. There wasn't a sound that Kisame made that wasn't betraying him. He had been working on this technique. It had been for the Mizukage, but this would work too. Besides, he needed to have a test subject with some actual power to play with, or he'd never know the full power of the Sarentokai ring. He jumped off the roof, landing silently and dashed towards his target. Kisame was standing in the same place, his sword ready, and Zabuza struck. He felt the satisfying pressure of blade against something solid and dug in. There was a gasp and a puff of air and Zabuza was left staring at the log. Zabuza jumped up just in time to miss Kisame's attack as he attacked from above, trying to shave him in half. The fact that that sword shaved people still really upset Zabuza. He dashed around, and tried to attack from the back, only to find himself blocked and swung the sword around the other way, jumping to avoid the undercut. There was an explosion from above and both men jumped back as Yujito Nii jumped down, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was the spectral form of a large cat with two wave tails that snarled at both of them. Hey, you said that Taki sent you, right? She asked Zabuza. I guess I'd better make good my promise then. I can kill him just fine on my own, Zabuza growled, go kill someone else. Kisame leaned forwards, apparently very interested in the conversation. Men are such babies, Yujito sighed, but it's not like there's a shortage in people to fight. I'll leave you boys to it. Zabuza wasn't sure if he should be offended or just ignore her. She was kind of irritating. It must have been overconfidence from the giant two-tailed cat. Zabuza decided that he could pummel her after he was done with Kisame. Besides, she was in Hakumei's debt now. Maybe she could be their sensei next mission. That would be fun to watch. Uchiha Yumi, the hope of the Uchiha clan. That was what she was now, and that was what she had always seen herself as, even before everything had changed. Itaka could remember when she was younger, and they had first heard of their engagement from their respective families. Itaki hadn't much cared either way, so long as he was able to spend time with Sasuke when he had the time. Yumi hadn't been so uncaring. She hadn't liked Itaka much, seeing him as somehow soft despite the power he had been born with, and Itake had known for a fact that she had hoped to be married to Shisui. He also knew that they still saw one another after the engagement was announced, and probably would have continued once Yumi and Itake were married. Itake hadn't liked it, but he had decided to let it go without mentioning it. Yumi would have told him that both his and her parents had had lovers, and there was nothing wrong with it. Yumi believed in strength and the clan, and while she respected Itake for the strength that he was born with, she was more interested in Shishao because of what he believed and the fact that he used what strength had for the benefit of the clan. They would have been a match made in politics. Yumi would have remained in the arms of her lover and Itake's best friend, and Itake would have grown more and more distant from everyone other than his little brother and perhaps any children that he and Yumi managed to have. Still, it was strange to face her like this. "It's been some time, Yumi-san," he said, looking at her evenly. "You've grown more powerful with your metal techniques. How dare you even show your face here? You're a traitor to your own family." Yumi's eyes blazed red as the sherry non-spun. "You look well," he said. "I would prefer not to fight you. I am only here to find my brother. I have no interest in getting involved with the clan politics again. You filth, I'll show you what the power of a true Uchiha is." The whip that Yumi had already infused with her chakra during the battle with Sasuke flew towards him and was joined by another. It looked like Yumi was going to go all out for him. But Itake didn't have time to play. The whips hit Itake directly, and he dissolved into crows. "Genjutsu," Yumi snarled, "you were almost as good as Shisui. I remember now." The feathers formed into Itake behind her, but Yumi didn't attack. She turned to face him, a slight sneer on her face. Even if she knew that she couldn't fight like this, she could still be verbally vicious. "I'm sorry, Yumi," Itake said softly, "I never meant to kill Shisui, but that does not change anything, does it? He is dead, and if it weren't for me, he would still be alive. However, anything I feel doesn't change the fact that we are enemies. I will leave you here, Yumi. I have no interest whatsoever in fighting you." The feathers were back, swirling and dancing, and Yumi stood alone, or at least it looked like she was alone. There was a sound behind her and Yumi turned, to see Shisui. "Shisui? No, you're dead," Yumi said, taking a step back. Shisui stepped forwards, his hair obscuring his eyes. "Yumi, you're weak." The apparition muttered, "I always thought you were so strong." "You can't be." For the first time something like fear glittered in her crimson eyes. "You aren't worthy of the name Uchiha." The thing looked up, its eyes a blank dead white and blood dripped down its face. The scream that Yumi gave was never heard. "Do it now." Orochimaru's strangled voice was met with complete silence. "What are you waiting for, Jiraiya? I can't dash." Orochimaru made the choking sound again and sort of twitched a little. When the twitching was over, the smile was back and he looked like he was going to try to vomit. For a second, Jiraiya was completely confused, then he remembered something he had heard about his old teammate learning a technique that allowed him to basically shed his sick and come back with his wounds healed. The snake-obsessed guy would have to have found a technique like that. But that wasn't right. One minute he was pleading for death and the next he was continuing like nothing had happened. Then there was that twitching. But there were more important things to think about. Namely the fact that Orochimaru had just slithered out of his own skin and Tsunade had let of the body's tongue and head was about to start pounding him into the ground, mental problems and all. Well, that was one way to solve the problem, and it seemed like it was probably the best one. He would keep Tsunade from killing him. Orochimaru had some questions to answer. He dashed forwards, blocked the strike that Orochimaru had aimed for his side and sent a kick that was also blocked. Tsunade sent a punch that Orochimaru had to dodge. Only someone with a death wish would block one of her punches, and he was attacked by Jiraiya's hair. Orochimaru's tongue shot out and deflected it, but he heard the grunt of pain that accompanied it. Also, his movements weren't the same as before. Jiraiya had sparred with Orochimaru more than he cared to remember. His moves were always fluid and carefully timed as well as rapid and hard to predict. Now, Orochimaru seemed to be twitching somewhat, and he wasn't using his more powerful attacks. It was almost as if his body wasn't doing what he told it to. Almost as if he was somehow being distracted by something. "Tsunade, Jiraiya started. I saw, she said, but I'm still going to beat him up for a while. Then I'll examine him to see what's going on. Jiraiya dashed forwards to meet the charge that Orochimaru was making and allowing a swirling ball to appear in his hands while Tsunade ran behind him. The ball suddenly seemed to ignite and Jiraiya's eyes took on a very hard look to them. Katon, Gon Raise Non. He called. Orochimaru was attacking too. As he ran, he coughed, and a sword flew from his mouth only to be grabbed. Kusanagi no Tsurugai. He snarled. The sword gave Orochimaru more of a reach, but the heat of the Raise Non made him move his arm slightly. It was that moment's hesitation that allowed Tsunade to jump, use Jiraiya was a pivot and hit Orochimaru with a roundhouse kick in the face before he had time to dodge. The kick, laced with chakra, sent Orochimaru flying into the seats with a crash that made Jiraiya almost fall over, particularly with his aching head that had just been used by Tsunade. Orochimaru didn't get up. Both ran over and looked down, braced for any kind of trick. Is he? Tsunade started. I don't think so, Jiraiya shook his head. It would have taken a lot more than that to kill him, even if he wasn't fighting right. Do we kill him? Tsunade asked. Jiraiya shook his head. No, he should be out for a while, we'll take him to Hinata. There's something I want to see. You mean? Tsunade's eyes narrowed, I don't believe it. There's no way. We won't know until we check. If I'm wrong, we kill him. Jiraiya's eyes were cold. Tsunade looked at their unconscious teammate and nodded, just to be sure. Lee had been running for about 15 minutes, dodging, fighting, kicking and hiding from everyone, when he stopped and started to feel ashamed of himself. He had left Guy-sensei, the only person who had ever seen him as anything more than a complete freak, other than maybe Haru, who had accepted being his eternal rival without even being upset, to fight along against enemies. Of course, Guy-sensei would be fine, but how could he call himself a ninja if he left his comrade and teacher that way? Lee turned around and started to head back, jumping into some bushes as he heard a group coming behind him. He knew one of them by sight. He was Hayate, a sick-looking man who Guy-sensei claimed was a true ninja in more ways than one. Another was a Hyuga Academy student who was running alongside two masked figures. Suddenly both figures stopped. What's wrong, Nii-san, Oni-sama? The girl asked, looking worried. Just Hoku, go with Hanabi, the other said in a very familiar voice, I'll do it. All right, the other said in a female voice, be careful, you don't know which side he's on. We don't know what side anyone's on other than us. That's why we all keep attacking each other. I've seen at least 3 pairs of Oto and Suma attack one other in disguise and calling it off. This was an incredibly stupid idea. The male muttered. Well, remember, we need to aid the west sector, the female said, I'll see you soon. The other nodded and then looked straight at the place where Lee was sitting. He could see the kanji raisin on the blank white mask. You know, Lee, civilians really shouldn't be running around in this, even if they have been trained by Guy. Raisin sighed, I'm surprised that no one's killed you already. Lee stood up very quickly, pointing at the masked man. Show yourself to me and tell me whether you are friend or foe to Konoha. He yelled, I may not be a true ninja, but I will fight you to the death if I must. I'm sure you would, but we don't have time for that. I think Guy would like to see his prize student live to see what happens to Konoha, Raisin said, but anything further than they was interrupted when the mixed Konoha and Suna group attacked. For a second, Lee was too busy digesting the idea of being Guy-sensei's prize student to react, but he got his wits about him very quickly. He sent a quick kick into the stomach of his attacker and a roundhouse one into another. Raisin had somehow managed to get himself surrounded, but he seemed to be doing fine and attacking with very light, glancing seeming blows that seemed to be causing a lot of damage a few minutes after they hit. Actually it looked like the Juken. Guy-sensei had once mentioned it as the special power of the Hyuga clan, but no one without the Byakugen could use it. Maybe it was some kind of style that was made in imitation of it. One of the Sunanin threw a kunao that Raisin dodged easily by jerking his head back, but it seemed to have cut the strings of the mask because it fell off, revealing the youthful face of Raisin. Haru. Lee said, his eyes widening. I've had enough of this, Haru muttered, the veins that the Byakugan caused to appear tightening somewhat, Haka Hasanjiki. He pushed on open palm towards the Sunanin and Lee could feel the pulse of energy that hit the man. He crumpled and Haru turned towards the others, jumped in the air and as the two others dashed towards him, spun in the air and managed to kick both of them. It looked like he had figured out how to use Jukin in his kicks as well since both of them collapsed after coughing up blood. Haru smirked and looked around. No one coming. Good, he seemed to be talking to himself. Haru, what dash, Lee began. My name is Raisin no Niji. Haru is just a false name that I used on this assignment. My team and I were hired to aid an organization that your mentor was a part of in their attempt to retake Konoha. Lee stared at him with wide eyes. I don't believe you. Guy-sensei would never. Not even for the sake of his favorite student who would never be able to become a ninja because of the fact that the current government didn't want to exert the effort. Niji said, a slight smirk on his face. Anything more that he was going to say was interrupted by an explosion from behind Lee. Both spun around and started running. I shall face you later. Lee said, and punish you for your misdeeds against Konoha. Once we find your mentor and get you to safe place we set up for the civilians, you can do what you want, Niji said with a shrug. The two kept running until they reached the place where Lee had last seen Guy-sensei. At first all that he saw was the figure of Guy, walking slowly away from what appeared to be a very dead body, looking winded and breathing hard. Then three members of the Inyazuka clan dropped down and surrounded him. Lee breathed a sigh of relief. The Inyazuka were always loyal to Konoha, and the fact that they were helping Guy-sensei just proved that Niji was a liar and unworthy of the name as his eternal rival. He'd have to find another. Mato Guy, you are under arrest as a traitor to Konoha, Hana Inyazuka said, her voice dead and her eyes avoiding his. Please come quietly. The world stopped spinning for Lee. All his life, he had wanted to be a ninja and protect Konoha. He had enrolled in the academy for that purpose, and it had broken his heart when he had been told that since he didn't have the ability to use chakra, he would never be able to be a ninja. When Guy had found him and offered to teach him, it had been a godsend. Finally, he would have a change to achieve his dream. He'd even found an eternal rival, like Guy-sensei, and Kakashi. But everything had always been in hopes of one day becoming a proper ninja and fighting for Konoha. All of a sudden, everything had fallen apart. Had Guy-sensei really betrayed Konoha like Niji had just said? This couldn't be real, right? This had to be a joke. The looks on the faces of Hana and her relatives said otherwise. Lee was completely frozen, and he barely noticed as Niji jumped forwards and placed himself right beside Guy. Hold still, he barked and started to spin, Hakusho Kaiten. Lee watched numbly as the three Konohanin were blasted off of their feet and Niji had already dashed forwards and hit them in the back of the neck. Element of surprise, Niji smirked, the best thing in the world. They were too busy looking at you to notice my coming up. Guy gave Niji a thumbs up. A stunning display of youthful prowess. He yelled, and coughed a little bit, I see your reputation is not given in vain. Niji nodded and looked over at Lee. Lee dashed forwards and ran to Guy-sensei, the only person in all of Konoha who had ever thought that he, some orphan who turned up out of nowhere, had the potential to be great, and bowed, tears streaming down his face. I will help you fight against Konoha. He yelled. Kano Amaru ran as fast as his small legs could carry him, ducking into alleys and trying to remain unseen as he neared his goal. The Hokage monument wasn't that far away now. He had to get there quick, and tell the Hokage what he knew. Hanabi-chan, Hanabi-san, had said that those people were Hyuga. So the invasion was being aided by traitors to Konoha? Could Takenai-san? Possibly, but he had told Kano Amaru that since he wasn't from Konoha, they might have to fight. Kano Amaru knew that he should be ready for that. Even if he had to fight Takenai-san, he wouldn't stop. He'd show everyone just how great the grandson of the Sandaime really was. Kano Amaru sped down another alley only to find himself on the ground, looking up at the form of Inyazuka-tsum. She was a threatening-looking woman from far away, but now that he was close to her, her wild-looking brown hair, black eyes, and hard gaze made him shiver a little bit. If she was intimidating enough, the dog, or more of a wolf, that was with her, made Kano Amaru even more nervous. It looked like it could have eaten him. What are you doing here, Kano Amaru? She asked, folding her arms, Hokage-sama designated a place for your family. Don't tell me that you got lost. Kano Amaru started, I have to talk the Hokage. I learned some of the identities of the masked people attacking us. Some raised an eyebrow, and I saw Hyuga Hanabi talking to two of them, and she called them Oni-san and Niji and II-san. Some froze. Are you telling me that two of the attackers are Hyuga Hinata and Hyuga Niji? They were captured and killed by the IWA squad that killed the Sandaime. I know. But that's what she said. Kano Amaru repeated himself, Hanabi's got the Byakugan, so I don't think that she'd be wrong about her own sister. If that's true. Some muttered, we have to take those masked nin captive. If IWA found some kind of way to brainwash them or wipe their memories. Come on, kid, I'll take you to the Hokage personally. Gaara never moved when he fought, at least, not if he could help it. He would stand with his arms crossed, giving mental commands to the sand. It was the same idea when he was fighting with his family. The only difference was that he really had to be more careful when he attacked. He didn't want to kill them. Kankuro had two puppets out that he was manipulating, and Gaara was pretty sure that he had actually switched with a third. Temari had alright sent a few gales his way. The only one who hadn't fought was Matsuri, who still hadn't managed to get out of his sand's grip. She hadn't managed to make a substitute. She was crying. The other Sunanin had retreating a ways back, and the Nara had met them there, meaning that Gaara had plenty of room to fight without worrying about damaging anyone that he didn't mean to damage. Temari and Kankuro were both trying to attack from close range and very quickly, in order to break through Gaara's protection, but so far it wasn't helping much. A joint gust from Temari with a sudden attack from Kankuro caused Gaara's sand to come up around him again, but they didn't see the sand that was coming towards them with the end in a very sharp point. The point suddenly divided and shot towards the two of them. Gaara would make it wrap around them and hold them. The Johio appeared out of nowhere, soaring towards him and wrapping around everything, sand and all. Gaara looked around to see Matsuri, who had apparently actually had a replacement and shown more deviance than he thought she had by waiting until he was focusing on Temari and Kankuro. She was actually fairly fast too. Had she been using a better weapon, she might have been able to actually attack him. It was too bad that the sand had broken through the Johio easily. No, Matsuri murmured. There was no scream or anger, just when I had the courage to use the weapon. Gaara turned to her and sent a wave of sand to hold her, but he had to turn around to pay attention to what his siblings were doing when the sand that had already gotten on them told him they were about to attack. He had to look at the sand to direct it best. After all, it was best to see a target before trying to hit it. Futon, Tatsu no Ashigoto. Temari's voice sounded, and a whirlwind began at Gaara's feet. Kankuro dropped down beside her. You really used that? I guess, even Gaara. Then the whirlwind started to look different. Brown started to be kicked up by the wind and it seemed to start to shift in direction until it wasn't a whirlwind any longer. It was a sandstorm. The wind didn't seem to be quite so impartial anymore as it suddenly burst out around them, wrapping them in sand and destroying their ability to see. There was only one different spot in the storm. One where, despite the wind that rushed around him, Gaara stood with his shell around him, completely unfazed. I win. Chapter 29, Part 2, Counterattack. Sakura was starting to get irritated by the fact that the two kept dodging. The only thing that they had going for them was their speed. The kid with the weird things on his arms might have been able to fight, but he needed more time than Sakura was giving him. Same with the girl. She needed to set up her attack, and Sakura wasn't going to let that happen. All she needed was one mistake. One little slip-up or underestimation. Well, looked like she'd have to make one. Sakura made a motion like she had lost her balance for just a second, and in that second, the boy's eyes moved towards his teammate. So, do you think she can fight now? The boy asked the girl sarcastically. Oh, would you shut up, she growled. This was your brilliant idea, he shot back. Shannaro. Sakura cheered as she managed to punch the boy's gut. The boy flew back and crashed over the bridge towards where Haku was. It was hard to tell with the mist that Haku had called up. Zaku. The girl looked over to where he had just been only to have Sakura appear in front of her. Teammates shouldn't fight with one another, she said, cracking her knuckles, it distracts them. You're really genin, aren't you? What's that got to do with it? The girl spat, I'm just as tough as you are. Sakura laughed a little bit. Your boss doesn't train you much if you think that, she said, now, get your friend up, and stand in front of me. If you move like you're going to escape, I'll brain you. They'll find a way to escape, an old woman's voice said. Sakura whirled around to see the old woman from before, Cho-san or something, watching her. I know, but hey, what happened to the guy who'd never heard of respecting his elders? Sakura started and interrupted herself. Cho watched her and nodded to herself about something. He disappeared. I managed to fight him for a while, but he refused to fight, she broke off, muttering to herself about what she was going to do to him when she found out who he was. I'll tell you this, that boy was no Konoha-nin. Why, are you telling me this? Sakura's eyes narrowed behind her mask. Because you're invading this city, the old woman shrugged, and because you actually thought about someone beside yourself. At my age you start to notice the selfishness of others. Consider it something of a reward. Sakura had the feeling suddenly that that old woman would have been just fine without any help. All Sakura had done was make her interested. Well, there was nothing that Sakura could do but wait and see what happened. That and watch like she was going to do with prisoners. It was pretty clear that Cho was going to tag along. Sakura turned back to the girl and Zaku, who had been pulled up. They stared at her apprehensively. Orochimaru-sama's going to use us as test subjects once he figures out that we've failed, Zaku muttered. Kabuto will probably use us for that freaky resurrection thing that he's been working on in his spare time. Resurrection thing? Sakura said, walking up, that sounds fascinating. You'll have to tell me all about it once Haku's done with your friend, and we have time to question you. Shino was getting kind of heavy. Good thing they were almost there. Sasuke bit back the curse that was working its way out of his mouth, and decided to use his anger for a more productive purpose. Oi, Shino, he said, if you don't tell me how you know about Naruto and me, I'm going to drop you. It's not an impressive story, Sasuke-kun, Shino said, and, as I told you, I have no intention of betraying you. That's nice, Sasuke said. They were almost at the designated area for the wounded and any civilians that Kainen found. As Sasuke jumped out of the trees, it came in sight. It mostly looked like a group of people, mostly standing, some sitting, against one of the walls that enclosed Konoha. Good thing for them that the explosion and the smoke that showed one of the walls being breached was on the other side. For a moment, Sasuke looked for familiar faces. Haku and Sakura weren't there, so they must have run into someone on the way. He was surprised to see the face of Shizune, who was wearing a black outfit with sleeves that covered her hands. Well, it wouldn't have made sense to have what she usually wore. Heels would have been a very bad thing in this kind of a fight, and Taunton would have probably gotten herself killed. Shizune looked over at Sasuke, smiled in a forced kind of way, and indicated him to set Shino by the purple-haired former Umbu, who was nursing a badly cut shoulder. You're as stubborn as I remember you, Shino sighed as he was abruptly set down, more like dropped. When we were children, I wanted to see which of our classmates I wanted to be in a team with. While I knew that I had little control the selection, I also knew that there should be people who I should actually wish to work with. The best way to see how people truly are is to see what they do when faced with something weaker than they are. You used one of your bugs, didn't you? Sasuke said, not bothering to mention that it was a completely stupid thing to use in that kind of a test. Shino wouldn't have understood. Sasuke didn't remember much about that clan, but he did remember that they didn't really see bugs the way normal people did. Yes, they were spiders, I believe. I had not been permitted to use my own bugs for something like that at the time. They were still getting accustomed to my body. Sasuke didn't say just how disgusting that sounded. The girls mostly behaved the same way. They screamed and killed them. Hinata-san did nothing and allowed it to go its way, and I don't believe that Sakura-san noticed it. You watched yours but killed it the moment that it touched you. The one who acted differently was Naruto-kun. He actually saved his spider. Before that, I had paid him no attention. My family saw him as something of a nuisance, and I considered him loud and untalented. That would be the Kyuubi at work. The thing had a habit of making just about anyone dislike Naruto on the spot. After sensing its chakra in the forest of death, Sasuke could see just how that was possible. No living thing would be able to stand the feeling unless it was used to it. It was probably lucky for Naruto that they had been forced together. After that, I had hoped that I would be teamed up with him. When I saw you again, Shino continued, I recognized Naruto-kun by the whisker marks on his face. Sasuke hoped that the Kyuubi would spend the rest of its existence in the stomach of one host or another, being digested. I assumed that since he was alive, that you were also all alive. It seemed to be a logical conclusion, but at the same time, I wasn't sure what I should do. It was clear that you had no wish to be found out, but I wasn't sure what your motivation was. So you kept your mouth shut and dropped little hints. That was stupid, Sasuke said. Shizune looked like she was busy with someone else. Shino was quiet and then nodded. You're probably right, Sasuke-kun. Your white-haired friend did look rather murderous sometimes. Oh, it wasn't Kimimaro you needed to worry about. He would have just killed you quickly. You should have worried about Haku. He would have been the one to drug you, slowly get all of the information that you knew out of you and then returned you to Konoha completely addicted to something that only he could give you so that you'd always be a source of information and keep our secrets. Shino stiffened a little. Your friend sounds rather frightening. He's a closet evil mastermind. I see. They were both silent for a moment, and Sasuke spoke again. You were the one who gave us that note, right? Yes, I wished to assure you that I wasn't an enemy. I had decided when I met you again that I would help you. My family disagrees with many of the reformations that Konoha has been through, and I am acting as an emissary. So he was basically there to make a possible political alliance that the family could ignore if they failed as a single rebellious child. Clan politics. Sasuke bit down the surge of annoyance towards Naruto that he felt for a moment. It seemed that the only reason that Shino was even going to join that was Naruto, and the feeling of jealousy was very much there. Sasuke shoved it down and reminded himself that Naruto also had Kyuubi. He supposed that it evened out in the end. Besides, it wasn't like he would have changed anything. It was then that Sasuke realized something strange in retrospect. He hadn't seen much of the Uchiha clan other than Yumi since the invasion had begun. Hinata honestly felt a little guilty as she and her sister ran with hate through the streets. She honestly hadn't ever really thought of Hanabi that much after she left. What she had thought had been that she would grow up to be strong, cold, and everything that her father wanted. The idea that Hanabi had been miserable had never even come to her. The idea that the Branch family was a bomb waiting to go off had. The fact that they had taken advantage of the fighting, when the Hyuga wasn't necessarily paying enough attention to use the seal, or attack in a group so that they couldn't tell who to use it on, was something that didn't surprise Hinata. It also didn't really surprise her that the rebellion, as spontaneous as it was being badly crushed. Hanabi, where was Otasama? Hinata asked as they ran. Closer to our complex. Hanabi said, breathing evenly. She would probably be more powerfully gifted at the Byakugan than Hinata was without the Tenshi Byakugan. I think he went the opposite way. Hinata nodded. There was a blur of motion and Kakashi landed next to them. Hinata had only seen him when he was in a more or less amiable mood. Now he was completely serious, and the single Sharingan that Shizune had told her about was very much visible. Shizune had said that the only time that he showed that eye was when he seriously intended to kill someone. If he wasn't taking an opponent seriously, he wouldn't show his eye. Where's Raisin? He asked. Looking over the three of them. He's busy with a civilian, Hayate said. How are things going? Badly, Kakashi said, his eye narrow. Between the joint invasion and route we have our hands full. The Uchiha clan's keeping a low profile right now, but some of its police are out. They're probably planning something, or reorganizing themselves. I'd imagine Fugaku's death would have come as a surprise to them. Danzo still hadn't attacked himself, but it's only a matter of time. Jeshoku. Hinata looked up to see the forms of Jiraiya and Tsunade, supporting Orochimaru land in front of her. Everyone jumped back a little. Jiraiya-sama. Hayate said, stepping another pace back, "Why are you carrying Orochimaru? We need to make sure of something. During our battle, he started to act strangely. We want to see if there's anything wrong with him, if you know what I mean," Jiraiya said, looking shifty. "Is there a reason why you can't just say you want to see if there's a seal on him? You're kind of making it sound dirty," she said softly. Sometimes she forgot just why Naruto called him Arrow Sennin. What Jiraiya means is that we want to see if there are any seals on Orochimaru. "Can you see anything strange?" Tsunade asked. Hinata nodded and felt the slight pull as the Tenshi Byakugan activated, and she focused on Orochimaru's chakra system. It was strange, the pathways seemed very strained and twisted somehow. Then Hinata focused on his head. "There's something on his head, it looks like it's around his brain," Hinata muttered. "I've never seen anything like it, but it's sending signals to the rest of him and blocking something else. I think it's some kind of seal, but I haven't heard of this kind." "I have," Hate's voice made all of them jump. He smiled a little bit and added, "Jiraiya-sama's report about Akatsuki mentioned something similar." Kakashi suddenly nodded, "I remember. One of them is rumored to be able to use seals on some of his underlings so that they can infiltrate villages. Is that what you're talking about?" Jiraiya crossed his arms and cocked his head to one side. "Seal, oh, yes, that one. It's a variant of a puppet technique and..." He trailed off and looked at Orochimaru wide eyes. "I'll take it off, but I don't know how much damage it's already done to him." It might kill him," Hinata said, ducking her head down, trying to pretend that everyone wasn't staring at her. This was making her more nervous than she had felt in years. Tsunade and Jiraiya looked at one another, and then nodded. "Do it," he said in a voice that was more gentle than she'd heard from Jiraiya in her life. He would have preferred it. Hinata nodded. The last time that she had destroyed a seal was when they were children. Hinata had learned to see chakra, but she had not been all that active in taking seals off and on. It wasn't something that was necessary all that much, and that made this even more stressful. Hinata also had the sinking feeling that if she did something wrong, she would kill him. It was like unraveling a very large piece of thread that had gotten tangled up in an enormous knot, but she didn't have the scissors that it would take to cut it. Hinata gently traced the trail of the seal with her own chakra the way that she had done for Niji all those years ago. As she traced the path's seal's marks, she saw it disappearing, but felt much more drained than she had before. Something banged to Hinata's right. "Don't move. Keep your focus," Kakashi said, "we'll take care of everything else." Hinata nodded, "All right, give me just a little more time." She didn't need all that much. Just a little. The knot was starting to slowly unravel, and she was starting to see what looked like some kind of core, almost embedded into the brain. Hinata gently tugged at the knot and the core, and felt it slowly give. There was a rush of energy, and the thing dispersed the way Niji's seal had, and Hinata fell to her knees, breathing hard. And a kunao landed right in front of her. It was strange, but this wasn't the real route. Sai ushered Ino and her cousins up the stairs of the flower shop to the family's living quarters, ignoring the sound of the person at the door. There was a little surprise waiting for him when he got that door opened. "Something's wrong," Sai said at last. He wasn't smiling for the first time that Ino had seen him. "I know Root. They don't act like this. At least, the fully initiated don't." "What do you mean?" Ino had a dismissive tone in her voice that said she didn't think Sai knew that he was talking about. "I recognize some of those masks. They're the same guys who've been hanging around since the war with IWA. Root has 3 divisions based on experience and power level." Sai recited the lesson he had learned so long ago. "The first division is made up primarily of children that have been recruited by the organization and adults that do not show any particular talent. Their purpose is to be the most visible in any attack. The second division is made up more of Chiryunin to low-ranking Jonin level members. They are not called to attack as often, but are very numerous and well organized. The final division is the true Root. Danzu's elite who all other divisions aspire to become. They are rarely seen, but are on level, or perhaps stronger than, the old Umbu. So far, what we've mostly seen is the first division, and a small part of the second. Most of our enemies have been the main families and the joint Suna-Oto invasion. You're saying that, Root's counterattack hasn't really begun yet," Ino said at last. No, it's begun, but they are scattering and tiring their enemy because he attacks completely. Root is much bigger than it used to be, Sai said. We need to get to the safe point where I can get a message to the others. Ino looked very hard at Sai. How do you know all this? Who are you really? She said. Sai smiled at her. My name is Sai, Miss Gorgeous. I made it up myself. I used to be a member of Root, if you can count their war orphans. They teach you a lot of things there, and I have a very good memory. Your mask is wrong, one of Ino's cousins, a little girl named Ai said, narrowing her eyes at him in a very unchildish look. Root all has animal masks. Yeah, Hoshi, the other one said, clinging to her cousin, I see them every day. Well, this isn't my Root mask. I was only 6 when we left. I never received one, Sai said. It's a very depressing story, and I don't really want to tell you it. Now, all we have to do is get to the top, and I'll get you to the point that we set up. You'll have to stay there. My father. Ino said softly. He was fine when I saw him last, Sai smiled, neglecting to mention that that was quite a while ago, and he had received the message to get her from another source. At the moment they couldn't afford to be worried or thinking about anything else but survival. They ran up the stairs, only stopping once when the door downstairs was forced open and they heard the sounds of a startled noise and a hissing, growling sound that didn't sound at all human. Ino looked back for a moment, but Sai kept her going. At the moment, everything was going the way he wanted, but that Rootin would probably get past the guard faster than he wanted. Sure enough, the sound was starting to tell him that the Rootin was starting to gain the upper hand. Sai didn't say anything, he just nodded up the stairs and pointed. They needed to move faster. Inukai had told Sai about the panel that led to the room. In the linen closet of all places. And when he reached the door, he opened it. Miss Gorgeous, how do you open the passage? He asked. Ino blinked, shook her head, muttered something under her breath that sounded like stupid and pressed one hand against one of the shelves, pulled the shelf and pushed one of the walls in the side. It opened with only a small click and swung behind them. If you try any other method the traps will activate, Ino muttered. She sounded like she was remembering something. Did your father tell you that? Sai asked. Yes, Ino looked down, he said I should always be careful. I never thought. She stopped talking, putting her head down. You never think you'll need something until you do, Sai said lightly. The passage wasn't well used. It was dusty and old with signs of ill repair and a few rotten-looking places. The house was older than it looked, but Inoichi hadn't seemed to have thought that he would have ever needed to worry about this thing. Well, it had been a very long time since Konoha had actually been attacked by enemy nin. Even the Kyuubi assault had just been that. Sai supposed that people started to believe that invasions happened to other people. It was kind of foolish though. If they were going to have a coup, it might have been smart to be prepared for the worst. Or maybe this was perfectly prepared to look like this. Sai did notice that their feet weren't leaving any kinds of marks on the dusty floor. So it was either painted to look that way or it was a genjutsu. Sai suddenly felt so much better. The sounds from behind them had stopped for the moment, so the Rootin was probably looking for them now. The panel had given them a head start, but Sai needed to get Ino and the kids to safety before fighting him. If he didn't, the girls would have killed him. Or worse. The children were starting to whimper and cling closer to Ino. Sai looked behind them, but didn't hear anything yet. How much further? He whispered. Not much, Ino hissed back. There was a sound behind them, and Sai smiled wider. You go on ahead, I'll catch up in a moment. Oh no you don't, Ino grabbed his arm. What happens when they're outside waiting for us? Sai hadn't thought of that. He hadn't been hearing much outside the building, but it could easily be a trap. After all, Ino was a valuable hostage. The clan head's daughter as a ransom was pretty sure to make the family stop, and Danzo would be sure to have Ino killed and replaced. There was that one clan who could make themselves look like anyone. Maybe Danzo had recruited them. Throwing caution to the winds, Sai and Ino picked up one child each and started to run. The footsteps behind them started to gain speed, and there was something starting to shine ahead of them. They both ran out into blinding light, and for a moment, Sai was too blind to even be able to attack. It was a good thing that his own attacks had taught him how to fight when he couldn't see properly. The sound of someone moving to his right made Sai move to one side and take out his sketchbook, and, hoping that whatever he had chosen was nasty, activated the technique to bring it to life. As Sai's eyes adjusted, he saw two root members. One from the first division and one from the second, looking at Sai's three-tailed tiger wolf. While a good hit would usually dispel them when he wasn't putting a lot of chakra into them, they usually had an intimidation factor that gave him time to summon something else. Sai opened his book again, looking at the eagle drawing, and brought it out. It appeared underneath all of them and brought them sharply up, giving Sai a good view of everything around them. The south section of Konoha, where one of the walls had been torn down, was in flames. There was what looked like a giant cat with two tails rampaging around. The other sections were in better condition, but it looked like something was going to happen. The crowd around the Hokage monument was starting to thin out, and it looked like there would be a decisive victory for Kainan or the Suna-Oto alliance. Danzo would attack from there. Sai had been taught before en route that the best thing to do was to give the enemy a brief taste of victory before snatching it from them. What is this?" Ino gasped out. Sai had almost forgotten about her and her cousins. "I guess you could call this defying gravity, Miss Gorgeous." He had really wanted to say that ever since that time in the flower shop, but the times that he had envisioned saying it had usually involved him reaching out to her from one of his birds, and this sounded slightly random. Still, it was better than nothing, Sai supposed. Hopefully Ino remembered where that came from. Kano Amaru had been all but carried through the streets to the Hokage monument, and now here he was, right in front of Danzo and his council. Well, part of his council. Uchiha Mikoto, bearing a grim look, was there in the place of her late husband. "What is wrong, Sam-san?" Danzo asked, turning to face her. Kiba, who had been there to make account of himself after Kakashi's betrayal, ran up to them. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked. "We haven't seen Shino or Yumi since everything started, and I'm not allowed to fight. Ibiki says it's because my loyalties dash." "Hokage-sama," Sam said, putting one hand on Kiba's shoulders and one on Kano Amaru. "Kano Amaru-kun here has important news." "And what is that?" Danzo asked, his eyes fixed on Kano Amaru. It was the first time that he had really been close to the man. While his family had seen Danzo every so often, Kano Amaru had usually been sent to play in his bedroom by his uncle Asuma while everything was talked about between those two. Without Asuma there, it was honestly a disturbing thing to look at the imposing figure. Where was Uncle Asuma anyway? He hadn't seen him at all since the battle had begun. I seemed to be the only thing that wanted to come out right now. Kano Amaru took a breath, closed his eyes and started again. "I saw Hyuga Hanabi talking to two strange ninja who were wearing masks. She seemed to know them and called them Oni-san and Niji and Ii-san. It all seemed to come out in a rush, and Kano Amaru panted a little at the effort. For a moment Danzo was completely silent, but he looked at Kano Amaru hard. "Are you sure about that, Kano Amaru-kun?" he asked. "Why yes, Hokage-sama," Kano Amaru gasped out. "It appears that not all of the Senju clan is traitorous," Danzo said softly. "Kano Amaru-kun here is still loyal to his home. Inyazuka-san, make sure that he has a place here to wait out the battle. It appears that the missing children that IWA kidnapped as hostages were found. I suppose that either IWA decided that the children would be better slaves or the children themselves attempted to escape but only made it into someone else's power. We have to find them and capture them," Sam said. Kiba ran up behind both of them, his eyes much wider than Kano Amaru had ever seen them. "Mom dash. I cannot afford to waste the lives of loyal men and women for the sake of a few misguided children." Danzo shook his head. "From the reports coming from my men on the field, they have had training. There are too many problems. The Nibi container managed to escape and is causing trouble, and even with the counter-attack, this is too much of a gamble without attempting to capture anyone. Kill them on sight." Sam stiffened, but bowed. "Yes, Hokage-sama," she said. "Kiba, come with me. You too, Kano Amaru." Kiba fell into step behind his mother as Kano Amaru ran behind him, taking one look behind him at the impassive Hokage. What had he meant that not all of his clan were loyal? It was only him and Asuma now. Everyone was always saying what his grandfather did wrong. Now they were even calling him disloyal. "Kiba, stay here with Kano Amaru," Tsum said, not looking behind her. "But, Mom, maybe I can dash," Kiba started. "No," Tsum's voice was harder than it usually was, "I don't want you out there right now." "But if Hinata and Niji are there," Kiba started again. "Do you want to kill your old friend?" Tsum snapped. Kiba jerked back like he had been struck. "You heard the Hokage. There's nothing that can be done. Even if you capture him, he'll be executed." Tsum's hands were in fists. "I'll go look for them along with the rest in the counter-attack." "But, the Hokage, Naruto, Kiba was struggling. "There are times when being a ninja means following orders that you don't like. I remember just how upset you were when those kids were kidnapped, even though you didn't want to admit that you had been friends with the village outcast, Uzumaki Naruto. I won't let you face him now. You'll have to face it one day, but..." Kano Amaru didn't really understand the conversation, but he did remember the name Naruto from his classes. He had been one of the children who had been kidnapped by IWA. Konoha had started a retrieval mission that had escalated into war, but then when Konoha finally prevailed, they found out that there were no records of what had happened to the children, just as there were none of the assassination of the Hokage. To this day, IWA refused to admit to the kidnapping or the assassination, and most people thought that it was a branch that was rebellious. Still, what was done right. And even though IWA didn't have the records, you never knew. Kiba opened his mouth but stopped and hung his head. "I understand," he muttered. "Good. Look after him," Tsum said with a last look behind her and running off. Kiba watched her go and gritted his teeth. Then he turned to Kano Amaru. "Go talk to my cousin, Cow, the guy with the white dog over there. He'll take you to the designated safe spot for your family," he said. "But you're supposed to come with me." Kano Amaru pointed. "A man never goes back on his word. Takenai-san told me that. I didn't promise, did I?" Kiba grinned. "I have to talk to an old friend." For a second his smile faltered. "Takei." He muttered, "I'm such an idiot." He took off without another word, leaving a confused Kano Amaru behind. The three remaining Otonin hadn't taken the death of their teammate well. They had been obviously shocked when they realized that Kimimaro hadn't incapacitated the fat member, and that he was going straight for the rest of them without so much as looking back to check on the damage that he had done. They seemed to have some kind of misguided notion that people fighting them wouldn't kill them, but going for the kill themselves was alright. Kimimaro had every intention of stripping them of that little fantasy. Why did everyone always assume that just because they were allied with a city that was known to be relatively more merciful than the other cities wouldn't kill? Well, Kimimaro supposed that Naruto would have probably not killed them. Haku definitely wouldn't have, but the others more or less depended on the situation. Sasuke would probably torture if the person in question had hurt someone who he cared about. The Spider Boy was shooting golden Sudoku now at him at a very fast rate. It really was too bad that Kimimaro was faster. The two-headed one looked like he was going to get in close though. Terenkyaku. One of the heads roared, sending far too many kicks for one body. Kimimaro stepped back, using one of his whips to wrap around the boy, trapping him, but before Kimimaro could finish what he had started, the Spider Kid attacked again. "I think we just met our boss character," he grinned, spitting some more of the gold kunao, and making Kimimaro jump back. It didn't make him let go of the whip. It was too bad that he was smart and was keeping out of Kimimaro's way. It would have made the whole thing so much easier. It looked like he was going to have to go about things one at a time. "Would you stop with your stupid RPG analogies?" One of the heads snarled, "Trash is trash, even if it's tough trash. Both of you, shut up." The girl yelled, "Fight. Now. Focus." Both boys swore at her. "Trash, am I?" Kimimaro asked. "We'll see." The two-headed one was trapped for the moment, but he could still use his legs, and he had a look that told Kimimaro that the two-headed kid was planning something. Well, he wasn't going to walk into a trap. Particularly when the person couldn't keep the glee from his eyes. Kimimaro whirled and made a jump towards the Spider Boy, jumping up the tree to meet him before he could jump away. There was a sudden piercing note ripping the air, and Kimimaro almost didn't land on the branch. The whole world felt like it was spinning, but from the looks of it, the spider guy was having the same trouble staying balanced. "Tewa!" he screamed, "Stop helping me, wench! Deal with it, Kidomaru!" Tewa snarled. Kidomaru overbalanced, falling off of the branch towards the ground, and Kimimaro jumped after him, closing his eyes and focusing on the feeling of his skeleton. "Tessenka no mai, Hana!" The bones on Kimimaro's wrist grew out, spiraling around one another until they created a spear that somewhat resembled a flower. Kimimaro pointed it at the center of the boy's skeleton. They both crashed to the ground, and Kimimaro slowly stood up, opening his eyes and looking at the two remaining. "Two down," Kimimaro muttered. It was easier in some ways to fight the Kyuubi Sora as opposed to normal Sora. He was definitely stupider this way, and Kyuubi was, hopefully, not having as easy a time controlling him as it seemed. At least that was what Naruto thought from the way that he wasn't nearly as uncontrolled as he had been when he was human. Maybe it was because Kyuubi was actually smart and worked with a strategy other than kill anything that moves and rip it into little bitty pieces. There was another roar and the thing sent more energy out at Naruto, but Naruto disappeared with a puff of smoke. Without Sasuke or Shino this would be hard, but it was easier to face the Kyuubi when it was outside of him than when it was inside. Still, he needed a good plan on very short notice. While Raise-Non was his strongest technique, a full facial attack hadn't really done all that much. He needed to tire him out some more. Even more than the bugs had been draining chakra out of him this entire time. If there was enough chakra drained out, he would get exhausted and Fuzzy Wuzzy wouldn't be able to keep up the connection. At least, that was what Naruto was really hoping for. "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu!" Naruto yelled, and dashed along with the 5 clones to ignore the tails that were trying to attack them. The flat, almost human head tried to bite at them, but Naruto kept away, attacking with a kunao and then jumping back. "Come on," Naruto muttered, "keep on attacking." The tails very suddenly stopped and Naruto cut the thing and jumped back. It wasn't attacking anymore, just growling and watching him. Naruto tensed. Could Kyuubi read his mind since it was in Naruto's stomach? No, that was impossible. If it had, it wouldn't have gone this far. Unless it wanted to enjoy taking victory just when Naruto was almost there. That sounded like something it would like. Then he had to do something different, and do it so that it was completely spur of the moment. That way, even if Kyuubi did hear him, it wouldn't have time to do too much. The Kage Bunshin all attacked in unison, and Naruto dropped down from one side with 2 more Kage Bunshin with him to attack. The Kyuubi Sora didn't seem all that interested in attacking with more than its tails, and all of them shot out at Naruto, impaling him and covering him with water. "Rai Bunshin!" Naruto yelled from behind the last one. The second Bunshin exploded into lightning covering the Kyuubi Sora. It let out a strange screaming cry and looked up to see Naruto running towards it with a Kage Bunshin right behind him. "Otama Raise-Non!" he yelled, slamming the ball of swirling energy into the thing's side. There was another eerie high-pitched scream, and the Naruto watched as the transformation slowly reversed. The reddish chakra slowly receded, and Sora's battered form, the skin raw and bleeding, started to appear. There was a final swirl of energy, and for a moment, Naruto could see the Kyuubi's form etched into the energy as it surrounded him and entered his body. Naruto was panting hard, and he slowly turned away, jumping to a tree, landing unsteadily and hopping to the next one on all 4s. For the first time in his life he wished he had one of Sakura's soldier pills on him. His whole body ached and his head was spinning. "Chakra exhaustion is the worst," he sighed, "and Baa-chan's going to yell at me for this." Someone landed in front of him. Naruto looked up and sighed. Kiba and Akamaru. Both fresh and ready for a fight. Naruto had a few more Kage Bunshin in him, he supposed. "I followed your smell, Taiki." "Or, Naruto," Kiba breathed. Being near water made it so that Haku could attack all the better. After all, ice was just a blend of air and water chakra. If there wasn't enough water, he couldn't use his techniques. Liquid water actually made it so that he had less chakra being burned, which was a good thing. Dosa moved to attack and for the first time noticed something. "What's with my arm?" he muttered. Those senbon have a drug on them that numbs the muscles. I've also struck you in places in the arms that have slowed the signals to your brain, Haku didn't mind telling him. Doso cursed, I still have my melody arm. He said, and he moved that slowly, for the first time noticing the senbon in his shoulder. You really planned this out, didn't you? Dosu asked. I don't want to kill you, Doso-san, Haku pressed, just surrender. I can still fight. Doso yelled. Haku sighed and the ice that Doso was close to spiked out very quickly until there was one of them embedded in his arm. I told you that I was holding myself back just to talk to you, Haku reminded him. I really don't want to kill you, Doso-san, but if you make me, I will. I'll do it, Isaribi said softly, I don't mind it as much as you do. Doso looked between the pair, and looked towards the bridge. There hadn't been many sounds coming from there after an explosion. It looked like Sakura had gotten a hit in, and that would have ended the battle. Your teammates can't help you, and you can't even move anymore, Haku said. Isaribi-san, I don't think that it's necessary to kill him, I'll knock him out and we can take him to the place where I assume Shizune is. Isaribi nodded once, and the scales seemed to recede into her body. Haku smiled a little. I'm glad that Tsunade-sama was able to help you, he said. It's thanks to you. Isaribi said, looking away, if you hadn't told me about her, and brought me, I never would have been able to look human again, but, I'm glad it isn't gone. Haku blinked, really? Isaribi nodded, I think that, it's a part of who I am, and, I shouldn't forget what happened, or that it, didn't make me a monster. Haku smiled slightly and turned to Doso, taking out another senbon. Don't worry, Doso-san, this won't hurt all that much. His arm was numb anyways so it didn't matter much. With his new prisoners in tow, Gaara headed back towards Narashikaku and his group. The Suna group had basically retreated the moment they had seen Gaara win against his siblings, but Oto was still there. Tamari, Kankuro, and Matsuri were all bound by Gaara's sand which allowed them to walk, but that was about it. Well, they could talk, too. What are you going to do, Gaara? Kankuro asked nervously. We didn't have anything to do with what Dad did. You know that, right? We never harassed you. You remember, right? Gaara turned to look at his brother. Actually, Gaara couldn't remember ever having actually spoken to Kankuro. Their father had kept both of his normal children as far away from Gaara as he could, and it had only really been by chance that he had spoken to his sister. Well, there had been one time, and it hadn't really been a conversation. Kankuro had been playing alone with puppets, trying to make them move with chakra strings, and Gaara had sat down to watch from a more or less hidden place. We were just as bad, Kankuro-san, Matsuri muttered, we should have known better. Who asked you? Kankuro hissed, and don't encourage him. I'm not here for revenge, Kankuro. I was honestly surprised to see you and Tamari. I am angry with father, though. Where is he? Kankuro looked away. Tamari gave him a calculating look. We don't know where he is. No one's seen any trace of him since the battle started, her voice was completely calm. Narashikaku dashed up to the group of them before Gaara could respond. Sabaku, we need to move out of this area and prepare. I've just gotten a message from Ibiki. Danzu hasn't really attacked yet. These guys were just a precaution. I've already sent a messenger hawk. Now I see why they pulled back so easily. Gaara looked over at the rest of the rebellion. They looked tired, and there were a lot of injured people. This was bad. They had been outnumbered to begin with. For a while he had thought that even without Danzu dead, the confusion would help enough for them to win. Gaara nodded, but not before looking up at Danzu's face on the monument, and the group of people that was starting to spread out. I don't think we'll have time for that, he said softly, his sand starting to spread out. Check the description for the links to the author.